me bring in Sonny because I want to get your perspective. Did that conversation go kind of where you thought it would? Were any of Jim's answers surprising to you, or how'd you feel about that?
So I was very surprised. I'm surprised because Jim and I are closer than I would have anticipated in viewpoints. And I'm trying to figure out, honestly, the thought that came to my mind is, why are you still holding on to the Christian belief? That's what kept coming up to me. And I don't know if you've heard that before, if anyone has ever asked you that, but it almost seems like you're more agnostic than you are Christian. And I would almost ask Eddie the same thing. I mean, it seems like you're more of what I would consider a liberal Christian. You have much more liberal ideas. Eddie's shaking his head. I can't wait to hear your view on this. But what I'm used to is the more conservative evangelical Christian who is very dogmatic in their viewpoints. And, your views impact the actions that you take. And if you don't take actions that are based in scientific or measurable fact, then where are your views coming from? And why are you still staying with the Christian viewpoint, if that makes sense? And I'll start with Jim and then go to Eddie.
Yeah, so I think there's like three little points in that I'd like to address. So one is why not deconvert? Is that accurate? Okay, yes, so upon my little bit of inspection from like all the way back to early patristic fathers, even they took the Bible in some cases figuratively and metaphorically. That kind of unveils some of the truth associated with operating in the world. So I don't really necessarily see a reason to. I guess the simple answer is I don't see a reason to dump the Christian belief. Not yet, I guess is the simple answer to that. There's another point in there. And I guess I'll kind of jump to like the last point that kind of came up in my mind. I'm sorry, I forgot the middle one because like you kind of asked like there was like three.
Yeah, actually I did too.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I guess the next one I'll kind of answer is the idea that I think science is great, and I just don't think it gives all the answers to the world. I think science measures what's invariable, right? So for example, matter is invariable, and I really don't need to wake up every morning and wonder if the sun is going to rise, because I know that it's there, right? I with a degree of certainty, I can predict that it will be there for quite some time, barring some crazy event. So I don't necessarily see science in conflict with religion unless it's taken to a dogmatic, fundamentalist, literalist point of view where God created the earth in 6 days. I think that science, interestingly enough, some of it got its start by people trying to, I guess, in a way, prove God's existence or understand the natural world to allude to the mind of God. Matter of fact, recently, I think it's interesting, and again, I'm not trying to take, what's his name, Makio Kaku, or I know I'm butchering his name. I'm really sorry, but he wrote a recent book called The God Equation.
Say it again, Eddie.
Michio Kaku.
The physicist. And yeah. I just love it because I think he's alluding to something that's like the highest thing possible. So,
hey Jim, do you think that you mentioned a second ago that you don't believe that science provides necessarily the answers to everything. Do you think that religion provides any answers where science fails to provide answers?
In a way, I would say it it does in some regards. I don't think they should be taken completely separate. I think one informs the other and the other informs the other in a lot of different ways, right? So we talk about it like a virtual engine, right? A dialectical process, like we have it. And I think science is and is, right? And in some cases, religion can be ought. If I were to put it as simply as I could.
So if I'm going to translate that in my brain properly, are you suggesting that the answers that religion gives is how we ought to behave, or how we ought to interpret things, or how we ought to treat each other? Is that what you're saying when you say religion gives us answers?
It gives us a framework of some kind. It may not be a perfect framework. I'm not going to sit here and say it's perfect. But I would say it helps us move, in a case, through the world, not is the world.
And I think the question was also directed to Eddie as well, right? Sonny, you wanted Eddie to answer that as well?
Yes, correct.
Why do you lean on the Christian label? I think is kind of the general direction.
Well, there's a lot of people in the chat that's heard me repeat this ad nauseum.
That's all right. You can do it one more time because it'll be the first time on this show.
Okay.
So
I'm a very, very philosophical person. I've been in philosophy of religion for, I don't know, over 10 years now. And I went through fundamentalism, like you were talking about, Sonny, the legalism, the fundamentalism, very conservative, went through, which is what led to my deconstruction, the conflict between that and science. And I became agnostic for a short while, but that's what kind of sent me on the quest to learn about, is there a God? And I've always had this intuition or innate feeling that there was something greater. And I totally understand that could be from the indoctrination growing up, being so impressionable as a child. And it wasn't really a practicing Christian family, but they talked about Jesus and sent us all to this church. But it was a feeling that an intuition I just couldn't make myself unconvinced of. So I went on a journey to find out if there is a God, who is this God? And after going through all the world religions, none of them made any sense to me, even Christianity. However, it seemed to make more sense than the rest of them. And the more that I learned about Christ and his teachings, and I was just, kind of mesmerized at how antithetical to the common practice at that time a lot of his teachings were, or seemed to be at the time anyway. And I still had a lot of doubts. I didn't doubt that there was something. And that's when I got into philosophy of religion. And I felt, I ran into all these different arguments for a God in general. And I was, I don't think there is an argument to get you to God. I think it's a cumulative case. And given all of these metaphysical arguments for God, I was just convinced that, at least deism was true. And the more that I studied about, epistemology, and I ended up becoming a Bayesian epistemologist. Basically, my epistemology is on probability and confidence in my beliefs. I don't really have certainty. And when I looked at the Bayesian analysis for the resurrection of Christ and the explanatory scope of the hypothesis, it was first from Swinburne, and it was extremely high. And I'm like, there's no way the probability is that high. Well, Tim McGrew, actually critiqued his and brought it down far lower than what it was. However, no other hypothesis given a Bayesian analysis is as high as that. And so given my epistemology, of which I didn't just choose to be a Bayesian, I've always found comfort in stats. I've always found comfort in, knowing something's safe because it's, a very small chance it could happen. And I've always kind of held to what's more plausible versus what's not what's certain. And so given that, I'm not certain that Christianity is true. I'm not certain that Jesus, fits into the God of the universe. If Christianity was falsified tomorrow, I'd still be a deist because I'm thoroughly convinced by the metaphysical arguments. And I think that goes into what one of the questions Bryce was asking was, are there answers that religion can answer that science can't? And absolutely. Science can't answer metaphysical. It's above the spectrum of investigation. The metaphysical is about being. It's more about the why than it is the how. And science studies the how. And we can't get to the why, which leads into Jim's problem that he was talking about, the is-ought problem. Science says it is, but we obviously have oughts. And given just science and naturalism, there's a gap there. How do you get to the ought from the is, which is one of the classical problems? I think the God hypothesis answers a lot of questions. It's, for nothing more, if one wants to hold on to the God hypothesis as an explanation, I don't see an issue with people having, a hypothesis that explains all these things. It doesn't seem to be, could even be explained by science.
So that
and the liberal Christian thing, the reason I was making a face about that is I went to the fundamentalist church I went to. It was worse to be a progressive or liberal Christian than to be an atheist. And that was kind of like the mind games that they played. So every time somebody says liberal or progressive, I'm like, no, traditionally a progressive.
Going to hell, right?
Traditionally
you're on a faster
progressive
train to hell than the atheists are.
But also, real quick, traditionally progressive Christians were those who denied any supernatural thing with Christ. So it would be your Christ seminar or the Jesus seminar. These skeptical Christian groups. That's typically what a progressive Christian was.
So we were about to bore Oz to tears there, but I do want to bring him in. But I'm curious because Kilo Doggy 1 asked the question, and I think it's appropriate for both Jim and Eddie, given what you said. Can we come to oughts without God?
I don't know how. That's what the is-ought problem is.
So Jim is nodding yes, and you're saying no. So go ahead.
So a lot of times people misunderstand what the is-ought problem is. The is-ought problem is without, if we're left with just science tells us what is. Mm-hmm. We can't get to what we ought to do just by looking at what is. There's a gap there. And to go from that to an ought is the reason we have all of the meta-ethical arguments that we have, even on the naturalist side, that, you've got subjectivism, relativism, cultural relativism. I mean, there's cognitivism, non-cognitivism. There's like tons and tons of different meta-ethical views because they're trying to find a way to bridge the is-ought gap. And so some people just deny it and say there's no problem there. What there really is, because if things are this way, yet we're going to say we ought to do this. I mean, we ought to do science. Most people would agree with that. Why ought we to do science? I mean, we can say technology and advancement and things like that. Why ought we do that? So it's really a very deep philosophical argument that academics have been arguing for a while, and I don't think I could do it justice here in a few minutes.
Now, you and I would probably disagree on that point, but I think what would be more interesting is to hear from Jim, because he was making some gestures while you were talking. So what do you think about that question, Jim? Can we derive oughts without God?
Yes, the short answer is yes. We can derive oughts without God.
How?
I mean, how?
Hold on, real quick. I'm not saying we can't derive oughts. That's not what I'm saying. How do we get from what is given science to what we ought to do, because a lot of people appeal to science for what he is. How do we get to that ought from science? If somebody believes in moral realism, they don't have to believe in God to believe in moral realism. We can believe there's moral oughts and just be Platonist or something.
Jim?
The short answer is you can get to oughts without a God. I would say that
we ought to treat each other fairly. Would you agree that that is a true statement?
I mean, that is a fundamentally true statement, yes. Now,
and that's true whether a God exists or not?
Yes, it would be true without the existence of a God. Now, so I don't want to, I want to pull us away from the idea of a God, and I want to push this more towards a wisdom tradition or a religious tradition. Because in that you have these processes that enable us to effectively learn some of these maybe these oughts or something like that, right? Because again, it's not necessarily scientific. So for example, like let's go to maybe a leadership tradition. Okay. And the reason why I would point to that is because leadership is, people say it's an art, right? And that's why we always hear in our language a difference between art and like the art and the science, right? And so I would sit here and say I'd pull it away from God, and I would look at traditions and frameworks, particularly wisdom traditions and frameworks that help us derive some form of oughts.
Okay. Oz, you've been pretty silent over there, but first of all, how you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. Like I shared the other night, was it 2-3 nights ago, whatever. I feel like I hit the bottom. I bottomed out, as far as the emotions and the anger and all that. So the last 2 days, 3 days, whatever, I've kind of felt like a different, in a good way, a new person. So Saturday's gonna be tough. It's the day of the services and everything. But but thank you guys. It's having this community, being able to come on here, and keep this crazy brain active and thinking and distracted has been a huge help and relief. So I love all y'all.
And I wanted to invite you on here because I know that this is a form of therapeutic. This is cathartic for you. Everyone deals with tragedy in a different way, and if this is helping you in any way, I want to help you be a part of it. And you can participate as much as or as little as you want, but you are in our thoughts, and I'm glad you're here. What did you think about the show tonight?
Well, I was trying to get all my text shit all figured. I was trying to listen in, and obviously we have, and I've spent a lot of time talking to both Jim and Eddie, whether it's on YouTube or Discords, phone calls, Skype calls, any of all those things. But something did stick out to me, that maybe I'd heard it before from Jim, but maybe he just didn't say it the way he said it tonight. But he said something about the founding fathers or the patriotic fathers, and that they found importance in the book being the Bible, and if they do, then why should we not? We shouldn't just dump it or throw it out or something along those lines. So before I go any further, Jim, can you restate that for me?
You are the epitome of I'm not going to say it. Anyway.
Get him, Oz. Get him.
You like to stir the pot. I was going to put something different in the pot, though. It wasn't going to be, anything. It was going to be something different. So here's what I'll say. The founding fathers, Craig is absolutely spot on. Many of the founding fathers were not religious in the terms of like believing in a theistic God. Now, they did understand the importance of religion and the importance of some of the religious ideas that were found in them. I would point to John Adams specifically on that example. Jefferson, I would say, is a borderline atheist, even though some people put him in the deist camp. Madison, also borderline atheist, and pushed him into the deist camp as well. But they also realized the utility of religion for people, and it's not because they're dumb or anything. There's these ideas of truth within them.
And also how popular, we talk about the idea of normalizing atheism in 2021. Certainly in the 1700s and 1800s, publicly identifying as an atheist would not have won you any votes, much less any friends, I would imagine.
Benjamin Franklin was an atheist. He was very outspoken, and he was loved in many ways. So he might be an outlier, right? And I'll grant that.
I actually didn't know
was
that
probably
he was
more
an
on the outlier.
I mean, I believed that he was an atheist, but I don't know. Is he on record of actually saying that?
I remember reading something in a paper that said that he was pretty much an atheist. It came out.
He was very anti-theist, or
like he hated it.
Religion. Yeah, quite a few of them were, because you're coming out of Enlightenment, and deism was very, very popular and sweeping through. So there was a lot of rebuffing to Puritanism, really, because that's where we got the fundamentalism we have today. It's actually stems from John Darby Nelson, or John Nelson Darby. Darbyism is what they call it, early 19th century. And the Puritans are the ones who were bringing that over here, and they rebuffed it, pretty harshly. Quite a few of them did.